Hello! Today I have three replays to cast. We have, first of all, an FFA, and hopefully this is the correct version. Now we have swapped to. So just give me a moment here because, well, the black, dark Starcraft against the bright IRC window is not... There we go. That's not very pleasing to the eyes. Alright, let us begin. So this was the replay casted before the Max Zerg game. Pause never seems to work. So we're going to have to work fast here because this is going to be a little bit more tismistic of a game, TBH. So in the top right, we have Oof. Now, conventionally, Oof has been associated with deep, dark fantasies. Fisting is $300, but I think this is actually Veek. And in the middle, we have myself, of course, the sitting president of the United States of Cambodia. We have Kian, who spawned... right there, yes. There's two piss-colored. One's like an older yellow, like it's been fermenting for a while. And then there's a brighter yellow. Of course, it's Popo, who's piss yellow again. And then we have Benno Kun, who is blue Terran. And then we have Beeve Kun, who is like this sort of like algae green kind of color. So I random Zerg because, like I said, pretty much every game in this night, I random Zerg. And Veek Kun is Terran, and Popo is Terran, and Kian is Zerg. And Benno, of course, why wouldn't he be anything but Terran? So there's going to be a little bit of discussion in this game, but we will possibly save some of that for later because we're going to have plenty of time to get into discussion in this. From what I understand, the beginning stages of this game were extraordinarily silly. I know on my half of the map, they were extraordinarily silly. So I spawned in the middle of the map, the most unsafe position of all of them. What normally would you do in this circumstance? Would you play defensive? Would you fast expand somewhere a little bit more off the beaten path, out of every person's scouting range? Would you do what Benno's doing and fast expand to the middle? You know, fast expanding the middle is extremely viable. It's obviously a lot more viable as Terran. Normally that is what I would do, actually, back in those Ricky Warlords and Merchants games. You would see lots of fast expanding to the middle. But of course, we played games like that a lot more consistently than in this group, right? So people caught on to that and they always scouted it. But then they just assumed nobody would expand there anymore. So then you could just expand there safely, and you know, that inverse anal psychology going on. Well, with this game here, Benno's going to fast expand there. I don't think anybody's going to punish him for the effort. Popo, on the other hand, is going fast wraiths, whereas I have gone, and I'm going to go double Larvosk, actually. Oh, Kian is also doing something very strange. Whereas Veek Kun is doing something more traditional. Look at all this APM spam. Benno, however, is in a state of calm and zen. Same with Beaver. Just don't destroy your fingers. It fucking hurts. So double expand. Yeah, no, it's what you do. Go ahead. You're Terran in particular. You're quite... Even if you lose half of them, if you lose only half of them, you come out quite on top. Meanwhile, what the fuck? There are 3 Ovoliths with... So, you can put the Kagrant Cesiants in them, you can't put the morphed versions in them at all. This is actually a spawn location, which is where Kian's going towards, since he hasn't scouted what's... So there's a wraith flying over there. This is going to be stupid, isn't it? This is already stupid. But no one's here. No one's here. Kian's thirst goes entirely... So it just immediately goes down there. Wraith checking out Veek. Popo never scouted me, otherwise I would be in a lot of trouble. I would be in a lot of trouble. Only now am I thinking to build defense. So there is a Wraith, however, going over to Kian, who has begun making some defenses here. And meanwhile, those Ovoliths, a little delayed, are heading straight towards Popo's not murdering Kian. I'm kind of disappointed. Benno, meanwhile, is just enjoying himself, playing his PvE game. He's testing his macro mechanics. Some Goliaths over here from Beaver as he relaxes nice and calm in this corner. But nice and calm doesn't describe this game because, well, Popo's about to have a rude awakening. He has an ant seal and that's actually it. Yep, he is making an anchor and there's some Mavericks. Oh! Oh no! Oh my god! And immediately they start morphing. Popo has sluggish reflexes here. Not entirely sure what's going on. It's actually making a Cyprian, but oh dear lord. Now the response has to come out. Oh, the Cyprian is immediately murdered. Popo is being tickled, but workers are a little bit more durable now. He might be able to withstand, especially with the assistance of the Anseal finally moving over to try to make a difference. Masons are dying en masse. Some of the Masons are being attacked over here that aren't even attacking them. So Kian could have gotten a little bit of optimization out of this. He's just going to remorph. A Cyprian did manage to sneak into the anchor. 2 more Cyprians are out. One of the... Oh, it's all over. It's a disaster. Popo has only a handful last worker. He's trying to get a couple last worker kills. Oh, he does. He gets 2 more kills out of it. Popo's down to 11 workers. That was autistic. So, meanwhile, I fast expanded over here. I still don't actually own any tech structures. I don't really need tech structures, to be fair with you. I mean, what do you do when you're already in a shitty spot? You play as greedy as absolute fuck. Who's gonna punish you? Everyone? Well, that was quite an exchange, as now Popo's base is just filled with creep. He's gonna start building the quarry and trying to mend his butchered asshole after that one. Kian goes for an expansion. He has 17 workers. I don't know what he's gonna do from this point. That was goofy. That was surprisingly dangerous. I mean, look at how late they were. If he had gone to where Popo was in the beginning instead of wasting his time going across the map and kind of waving around, or if Popo was here to begin with or somebody else, there's a good chance it could have got some real damage in unless they had gone for a very early attack structure. Meanwhile, Benno is kind of doing the same thing that I am doing. Being as greedy as fucking possible. He's floating an insane amount of minerals now, especially for this early in the game, because, well, he has no reason to pay attention. Just gonna mind his own business. I'm going straight to tier 2, why not? There is a Quasark pool being built, and this base here is mostly ignored, to be honest. I finally start thinking about taking a base down there as Beaver slowly amasses Goliaths from a single fulcrum. Azorka's Shroud coming from Kian here. He knows he has to play tight to keep Popo on his toes. As Popo kind of like chills out for a while, not really able to do too much, what with his worker count being devastated. A scout from Beaver was annihilated over there. I start taking random tech structures. Of course, my goal is just to go straight for tier 3, but that's a little difficult because the gas cost is like 1800, and I don't have any gas, so I start making tech structures because I figured at some point I'm probably going to actually need to make some units. And I'm going to need to have the ability to make some units, so that means making structures, preferably remembering to morph structures, especially the all-important Hydrock Den. Maybe making some extractors would be a good idea too. Meanwhile, Benno is just content to do his own thing. You know, Benno's worker count is not nearly as high as it should be. He is just very calm. It's just very relaxing. It's also probably worth mentioning, I think it was actually really late for Benno, so it's probably too relaxing. He might actually be falling asleep. I think this was running quite late for him since his time zone is quite different than ours, I believe. So Popo goes for a fairly early tier 2, all things considered. I start expanding to the middle. I didn't actually notice these workers here. I didn't notice them when I started building, and I'm pretty sure he never notices me either. So that's actually from Beaver. Beaver's gonna notice that I'm there, and then I have absolutely nothing. And more importantly, that these expansions have absolutely nothing. He also knows that I have tier 2, but haven't done anything with it. Now, Veek has also been very idle this game as well, kind of chilling out, perhaps expecting a lot more early aggression than what really came. So he started going to tier 2 and he's preparing a magical drop. And meanwhile, some Goliaths have appeared, so the time has come to tickle in defense. Oh fuck, it's a Wraith. We might be able to tickle the Goliath to death, we probably can't tickle the Wraith to death. Oh! Never mind, it tickled itself to death. Meanwhile, my workers over there, I don't know if I moved it or what happened. I might have noticed them there and I might have started intending to build there anyways. I honestly don't remember. A couple days ago, it was just too long for me to recall. I was content to ignore this Goliath for the time being because I was doing nothing. I don't know. I think I'm just permanently asleep. So a Wraith appeared and it died. Whether or not Veek got to see all those Goliaths, I think... No, that was Popo's Wraith. God, it's hard to keep track of them all. Now, Veek charges in forward. I don't think he would have dove into here having seen those Goliaths, so he just... So I'm kind of like, well, alrighty then. I guess I'll just try to let them sort it out for themselves. They just didn't like this expansion at all. It's just a single madrigal. Just killed everything. So I got rid of him. And then the Goliaths move forward only after. The Vilgora core dies. The battle is being waged. Meanwhile, some Lekizlis have been dropped over here. Veek has arrived. There is a madrigal in there, but it died terribly. Veek is just kind of flying around being a nuisance, but he wasn't very successful down there. Meanwhile, oceans of Rillarocores come over here and tickle Beaver. This expansion's quickly becoming a hotspot of stupidity. I completely forgot about middle, by the way. It's just... I was having brain problems being Canadian and all. You know how it is, right? Like, maybe you don't. Unless you have the misfortune of also being Canadian, then believe me, I sympathize, brother, but... Popo, however, is on fire. Tenderized, but not dead in spite of repeated heckling. Meanwhile, Benno has ascended to 108 workers. Absolutely untouched the entire game. Benno just commonly does his own thing. He starts teching to tier 2.5 with the Fountainhead. And he's building a massive starports, in which he's going to build sundogs from because, well, it's generally fairly predictable what he's going to do. Now, one thing that I was not aware of at the time is that sundogs are actually AoE. Well, I was aware of before this game, but only within like a short amount of time. I think it was when we were casting that, the Ascension match as actually is. I always envisioned sundogs as being like single target assassins, but no, they are AoE, so that's very important to know, especially as Zerg. So, it turns out there's more Goliaths over here. They just won't leave me the fuck alone. No, Arleth is dead. Meanwhile, I did build over here, but I mostly forgot about its existence. It could have made a substantial difference for me, to be honest. Meanwhile, there's two madrigals coming over from Popo over to Veek-kun. Will Veek enjoy a taste of his own medicine? Popo doesn't realize it, but he's avenging me. Oh, it's a massacre. Oh my god, 31 kills. Down it goes, but not before annihilating, like, over half of Veek's worker count. The Goliaths return home, defeated by the handful of Convolisks and the Scortrith, and some more were created, but they're mostly spinning. Meanwhile, in the middle lane, I am just building stuff over there as additional Lekizlis are coming over. Oh. Nope. Oh god, there's more of them. Oh, down they go. This is not going to be terrifically effective, I don't think. Oh, some worker has died, but Ahmed gives his life to easily destroy the last... Oh! Oh! If Popo's not careful, he's going to take more damage from the lone one that's just out here in the middle of nowhere. Meanwhile, in the middle, Tism is afoot. As I start tickling Beaver and realize there's defenses everywhere. Convolisks are actually not really that great against Sentinels, so they all die for basically nothing as he starts tickling this expansion. Meanwhile, I sent units over here and they ran into a whole mass of Veek's shits. So I was between a hard man and a hard place, precisely why I invest all my money into getting tier 3. Well, more precisely a chunk of my money, because I don't know, I think I was asleep for half the time. Now, a lot of these Goliaths are wounded because there's been scuffles back and forth. There's some more magicals coming. And the Azura Corps kind of like fend them off. I kind of like give up on this base, but Beaver doesn't really push into it for the moment. Meanwhile, my attempted proxy in the middle was met with a wall of shit from Benno, and I realized, wait a second, nobody is probably attacking Benno because they don't take him very seriously, and they don't realize that Benno will just sit there and amass ungodly numbers of workers, and then eventually go straight up to Hippogriffs because, well, he's figured out that Hippogriffs are the end of all things, the key to the end of all things. And also, I'm Zerg against a game of basically all Terran. There isn't a single Protoss in this. It's actually really not a good spot to be in because tier 2 Terran, or tier 3 Terran is definitely extremely scary to deal with as Zerg. Not just hippos, but all the things we don't conventionally see, like Aeons and stuff that can revive. They get a lot more AoE and they can deal with your tier 2 a lot more easily. Tier 2 Zerg, I definitely feel like has the advantage though. Meanwhile, this expansion is going to die. I'm kind of just not really paying too much attention in this at all. Somehow nobody in the bottom has died though. There was this kerfluffle over here from Veek's drop, and some of Popo's workers took a little bit of a hit, but I mean, he's only taken a small amount of damage here, so it really didn't make too much of a difference. But I just want to pay attention more to Benno and his ungodly amount of shit. He has the largest worker count now at 164. He has spent the entire game oversaturating his resource lines and then gradually transferring that, whereas of course the atelier is en route. You probably already get an idea of the gist of where this game is going to go. Is even though Benno ended up taking the most greedy position, the fact that everybody seems needlepoint focused on me and Popo is going to serve them very poorly when the time comes. Benno may not be the most aggressive of players, but like I said, he knows what to do. And look at his resource count. You can't kill that which does not live. The man's filthy fucking rich. He's already tier 3.5. He already has a mass of Sundogs and Goliaths as well, so he's quite suited to defend against any kind of aggression that does come his way. Nobody, however, is intent to actually aggress him. I'm much more intent on getting rid of the people who keep tickling my anus. I like how Veek spent more time trying to attack Popo with magicals and shit, and then he just kind of like gave up on attacking me. No, there's a magical. Well, Beaver decided to come down here, seeing as there was an expansion down here and he probably wanted it for himself. Tickling was en route, but he doesn't realize that, well, Benno doesn't need that expansion. Benno is extremely rich. Oh. Veek was looking for some anuses. It didn't matter which one, and he found some. The Goliaths go over there somewhere instead of defending his beleaguered expansion. Meanwhile, a mass of calculusks come over towards Popo. This might be mildly more annoying than what Popo's had to deal with so far. The expansion is squashed, and Benno doesn't put up any resistance for the moment. Meanwhile, more and more and more workers are dying to these magicals. How disgusting. Meanwhile, I have some Axatrilisks, which are new Zerg units we basically never see. I would be lying I said I didn't build them just because we basically never see them, and I've only ever used them once, and I have no idea how good they were because the game was already decided when I got them. It turns out they might actually be silly, as they have 3 armor pen and some kind of revive passive. But I don't know if they're very good against Goliaths. Benno popped over there and was like, nah, I don't want anything to do with it. I'm not sure I actually got to saw the shimmer there. If I did, I assumed it was Beaver's shit. Meanwhile, there are a lot of magicals flying towards this upper expansion. Zveek has given up on Popo, who is being assaulted by a large number of Calculusks. They defeated the meager defenses over there. Oh shit, the feet have come. The feet have dispersed. Popo's actually in trouble now. What's he going to do? Well, he's going to make tier 3. Meanwhile, there are random Zerg fighting the Cuirasses. And the armor pen definitely helps against them. It just so happened I had units with some armor pen. Meanwhile, thousands and thousands of madrigals come over here and destroy this expansion. So it is worth mentioning that around this point right here, Kian actually desyncs. So this may be, I don't know if it's exactly at this point here, but since we see the red text that Benno is talking about, I believe that is, it was only Kian that desynced though. So that ultimately saves Popo, though to what extent I'm not sure, because, well, he's dying miserably. Cyprian's just annihilate his army. So I have some Gezzies here, but the Madrigals are kind of fast enough to keep up with him, so I didn't have enough Gezzies. It is worth noting that unless Zveek like hard tunnels right into Starport at this point, he is going to have a very, very bad time. Because now that tier 3 is out, he is just going to be swarmed by these now that he's tickled me, as Beaver has already been eaten by the Raptors that kind of... the center body doesn't even move when they attack. That's such a Blizzard problem. I love that. So, Kian's going to attack Benno here. It's the first aggression Benno's ever seen. Seeing it, Benno is literally undefended. He has like a handful of watchdogs and then his military units. He has nothing over here at all. That's just how complacent he is that nobody has ever really touched him. He's got a couple defenses up there and that's it. All those Magicals came over here and got swarmed by the Gezzies. The Gezzies are going to go straight to Veek's butthole. Veek, not very rich, trying to make some wraiths to defend. Don't know about you, but wraiths don't seem like the best thing to deal with these at the moment. Now, Beef kind of still alive because I wanted to squish the other person before he did more damage to me. Meanwhile, we have a mass of Hippogriffs. And they're just going to annihilate Kian since Kian is desynced at this moment. Kian can't build anything against us anyways. But to be fair with you, I'm not sure there's anything Kian could do against that. So the Madrigals only put up a tiny bit of resistance and are immediately stomped. His ground army makes its heroic Ahmed stand and is annihilated. Well, those wraiths will be the ones doing the damage in the end because I don't have any anti-air. I didn't need it. It was just going to slowly tickle everything to death. And he's getting more wraiths though. Ground units have arrived. And Veek rage quits. That leaves myself, Beaver, Benno, and a desynced Kian, and Popo, who may well have died if Kian kept attacking him, but he didn't. So by far the strongest members of the game right now are myself and Benno. But, and this is why I said there was going to be a discussion, we're going to discuss Hippogriffs. Now, Hippogriffs we have seen a number of times in these games. Of course, we had the Terran versus Terran between Benno and myself. I'm quite well acquainted with them. I'm not definitely well acquainted with Zerg whatsoever. 4 armor pen on these dudes. Their animations are really quite something else if you ask me. What can Zerg do against Hippogriffs? Not much, actually. I did a lot of theory crafting throughout this and after this game about what Zerg do against Hippogriffs. Well, you do have Alcagelisks, and Alcagelisks was ultimately my end goal here. Because they are heavy air, they have decent range, decent stats. So if I had to face... Because it was inevitable I was going to have to face Hippogriffs in this game. All my opponents were Terran, right? You were just going to have to deal with Hippogriffs at some point. And I did believe I knew about diadems in the middle. Well, I knew Benno had the middle. I just assumed it was super heavily dependent. I mean, look at Benno's money. Benno's gas is actually not too great right now. So there's some geysers he hasn't capped yet, but you can see what he's doing, right? Like, he's just going to build nothing but hippogriffs and then his stack of sundogs. I knew Beaver was still in the game. I wasn't like super intent on hunting him down. I did want to kill him, but I kind of wanted to start recovering. The problem is that I was not really doing too well. Like, I wasn't really paying attention that much. There's a lot of like idle workers and shit. Yeah, I was not really doing very good this game at all. There's definitely a lot of idle workers. I don't know what I was doing in this. I was just looking around here. I thought it was Kian that I had killed. I realized it was Veek. So a lot of the dialogue that was occurring throughout the game was actually confusing the hell out of me. Meanwhile, Benno's hippogriffs are going to come down here and murder a desynced Kian. Not really sure what I was doing. I was coming over here and murdering him. Definitely a lot of idle workers going on. One was selected. Another was selected. Don't know if that's me selecting them, though. I don't think so. It's kind of weird. So, there is a random Popo diadem out in the middle of nowhere. Some Valkyries and so on. The last of Beaver's bastion over there is stamped out, but Beaver does exist elsewhere on the map, just barely. He does have a Talos. I never moved those workers, apparently. I did move these ones, but I forgot about the other ones. I think I was just too used to ignoring that base after Veek kept annihilating it. I'm not sure. I don't really know what I was doing. Not capping geysers is one of them. I think I was also checking the tech tree because I didn't want to end up in a case where I was not doing shit. That's me going through hotkeys. There is a lone Kian Hatrosk over there, not being used by anything. There's some Vithrilisks. Not really sure. Am I desynced in this replay? Or did I really just forget about all these? What was I doing? Beaver is somehow alive. No, it really just take that long. That's embarrassing. It's I forget about things, right? Like the multitasking becomes too much. So really what I should be doing is taking all the bases on the right side of the map, but I haven't scouted quite that far yet. Meanwhile, Benno has 113 military units, the vast majority of which are air units, and no short amount of them are hippogriffs. Hippogriffs deal line damage. They fire 4 times with 15 damage, having an armor pen of 4. We've seen hippogriffs in small numbers within our turn versus turn and other such games, but this will be the first game we ever see a very, very large number of hippogriffs together. And suffice to say, they annihilate everything with their 15 range. Anything that enters range of them that doesn't otherwise block their projectiles is going to instantly die. And anything that does block their projectiles is going to instantly die. Now, Alcagelisks have 6 armor, so that should help. They only have 10 range, however, so the Hippogriff has a whole third of range above them. That's quite high. I did start expanding towards the right, but I wasn't really quite familiar with what was going on. My goal was just to amass an enormous armada of Alcagelisks, Vithrilisks, and just hope that was sufficient to deal with the Terrans. Diadems don't hit air anymore, but that doesn't necessarily matter. They have so many AoE options and other shit going on that I didn't really want to use anything besides really heavy air at this point. I wasn't even building Gezzies at this point. The other thing you want to get, though, is Arcava cores. Now that they should hopefully be fixed and not have a 5-second or longer attack time that definitely hurt me in that game versus Shambler and Ascension. They're also beefy and should be able to get close and perhaps distract units like, you know, Phobos, Hippogriffs, whatever, from whatever. I'm actually not sure what the armor count is on those units. I like it how he's building scrapyards. Well, I think that's because his gas is not... I mean, he has high gas, but I think he's just going to mass blackjacks anyways. So Benno is finally brave enough to start peeking his head out here. He has almost 300 workers. And of course he's going to go straight for me just as I'm slowly recovering here. And I saw all the sundogs and I was like, well, sundogs deal AoE, right? So I probably want to use something that has range against them. So I was trying to morph Cagelisks, but to be quite honest, they're very expensive. And I have money now, but it'll disappear in a hurry at some point. Oh yeah, the Zorka's Shroud upgrade was very expensive. I didn't bother with layers because I didn't trust that I could multitask them. I was doing really badly in multitasking in general, so like you can see Kian's camera over here just wiggling around because it's desynced, but it's still tracking his camera in his desynced dead base. He's got some shit here. He's also got a fuck ton of money. Pippo, on the other hand, is also very, very poor. And not really doing too much at the moment, just trying to take back some of the map now that he finally has some breathing room. So I was starting to make an army here, but it wasn't really that strong yet. It's going to take a little while to catch up to Benno, especially in terms of raw damage. Benno's damage is definitely a lot higher. I also needed more detection. I was consciously aware that I needed detection, but for some reason I kept forgetting to build it. But my army, however, was very, 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 very expensive. It was extremely expensive. The Alcagelisks in particular are very, very pricey. So they do appear to block piercing, but it doesn't matter. They like approach and they're just instantly... Yeah. So, I already lost all the front line. All the Vithalisks died instantly. The Alcagelisks all died instantly. I still had the Gorgakors, but they needed to be upgraded. And I don't know if I even have the structure. Oh, I think the Ultra Cavern is what I made. But now I don't have the money. I don't have the money to upgrade them. So my hope was that Benno took a very slow amount of time to deal with this. So the Zarkavakors are quite beefy. 5 armor, 320 health. The damage is not amazingly high, but they do have that damage passive, right? They approach and they just die instantly. Just instantly killed. So I did lose a chunk of shit there. I was trying to make some more here. Basically, I had to kill him before he entered my main or the game was just going to be over. I needed them all to fire in one spot and allow units to get on top of them so the damage got separated. But I didn't have enough of... You could argue he didn't even need the Hippogriffs to win that. They just instantly killed everything. I did not realize just how much damage there was. So there was nothing I could do at all. It was already over. So I just left. So, like, what were you going to do at that point? Nothing. There was nothing you could do against that. I think, in theory, the Defiler replacement might work, but I think that their Dark Swarm functions based off of a health pool now? You know, I haven't really used them, but it's a ground unit, right? So I needed like 3 times the size of the military, which I wasn't going to get. And yeah, it wasn't gonna happen. So Hippogriffs are definitely a unit that scales not really quite linearly, right? Like once you get so many of them, there's nothing that can actually approach them so long as you have vision on them. And they do have quite a high sight radius. Not up to their max range, but high enough that the Zerg can't even begin to approach them. The Alcagelisk is by far the single most expensive and most durable unit you can make. And 5 or 6 Alcagelisks would die before they got even like 1 or 2 hits off. Pobo doesn't fully realize it yet. He knows that there's a lot of Hippogriffs yet, but he's absolutely fucked. He thinks, oh, I can make Silver Tongues. They're a little cheaper and they have 12 range. Well, they're going to die absolutely miserably. I mean, they're quite good as far as infantry are concerned, but Benno at this point has been untouched for the entire game. to the point that he still hasn't bothered to actually defend anything here. He's got idle workers all over the place. He's probably a very sleepy boy. But Kian is just like a pet being kept in Popo's basement. But Popo definitely doesn't have any means to deal even with his groundy army at this point. Good luck. Silver tongues are something you want to use if they have like individual units you want to snipe, right? You can kite a little bit with him, but my god, he just has so many. Eventually you're going to get pushed into a corner and going to die miserably. And suffice to say, Benno's army is a lot cheaper than this one. Popo just doesn't have enough to deal with this. I like the diadem might help even the odds. Popo tries to make him work for it. Benno is giving a lot more kills than really he has any right to be getting off of this, but the diadems might help him out here. Oh, and there's some damage, and off they go. So Benno's biggest issue at this point is he's not very decisive about ending the game. And, you know, kind of like what we've seen with the other games is he doesn't really realize what kind of a position he's really in here. So he absolutely has, like this is game-ending power. Like there's nothing anybody can do against this at all. The only thing Popo can really hope to do at this point is make an equivalent number of hippogriffs. Or look for some kind of attack where he can brute force the hippogriffs enough to survive 2 or 3 volleys and then flank them with his own hippogriffs. Because hippogriffs will penetrate each other. Kind of the problem you entered with hippogriffs at this point is just because of their raw range. So you basically have an armor requirement you need to be this tall to enter to even approach them at all. Otherwise, the line trace will insta-gib absolutely everything. And even if you do have the armor, the fact is that since they have 15 range, they will instantly kill anything that enters their range anyways, before the second set of shots, like the tail end of the volley hits them. So that's why the Arcadialisks died so fast. It's not just like one volley killed one volley killed another. The first one died and then the rest of the projectiles hit the other ones, right? So you kind of need what happened there where you get them to split their projectiles by coming from multiple sides. It's very hard to arrange, even in an open map like this, unless you're already very, very far ahead. Now, I believe a world most certainly exists where Popo can take this game. I think he has the finesse to arrange that. He has to start by, again, expanding to the whole right side of the map and keeping Benno occupied long enough that you're able to mass up. That means constantly attacking his bases and ignoring his army. At this point, Kian finally had enough of being Popo's pet and gave up. So, Volks do pretty well against Sundogs because, well, they do a lot of damage, but they are squishy. Did do just some damage there, but Popo can do nothing against the actual fleet. Popo's gone for a mixed army. He does have Magnetars. Magnetars are one of the Terran's answers that hypothetically can do well against this, but Popo's going to make a terrible mistake, which is approaching without like 100 units. He's hoping to catch Benno off guard, but the auto acquisition will instantly kill him. Just like that. Now, Benno should be quite aware that Magnetars are a threat, but Popo needs to sit back, bulk up his units, and tickle Benno elsewhere on the map to get him to do things he doesn't want to do, like run back to his base. But he'll be very eager to run back to his... Yeah, that says a lot about the damage that's coming out of them. I'm not sure how many hippogriffs there are, but it's absurd, right? Like, you reach a point in the numbers of them that there is nothing that can ever get close. You have to split up their damage somehow. It's really the only way. I think with Terrans, if you had like a whole bunch of Azazels, stack up some armor and defense matrix, and then with a large number of units, that's what you'd want trying to pull the initial fire from them, maybe like a bunch of Phoboses, and then you run up his ass with Magnetars, or even like fast ground units like Pazuzus. Just something that can get under them to make them like shooting different targets in different directions. Unless he actually micros them. If he micros them, it'll never work. You basically have to hope that he's tired enough that you can bait him into some bad engage. Like, most of his hippogriffs have never been hit. Some of them are a little low, but most of them have never been hit. Because nothing can get close to them. I think an opposing amount of Sundogs can also work. We notice he doesn't have an ant seal with him anymore, but it would take time to do that, and Benno is just going to slowly march into Popo's base now, and all the massive blackjacks is heading towards... What is this? I think Popo knows. He must lash out. He screams out in pain as he lashes out at you. The nanite assemblies I used to block hippos in games past. Oh. I want to see how fast they kill the nanite assembly. Popo's got his own hippo. That was a great idea. He just needed like another 30 of them and preferably spread them out a little bit. Now, this is dying pretty quickly. There's only a few of them attacking. Good God. Popo is in dire straits. What can a man do against such reckless hatred? Well, diadems are being murdered by blackjacks. If that isn't disgusting, I don't know what is. And this is where we reach the discussion portion in full. What do you... What do you do with this other than fight it with hippogriffs? Well, if it's the small number, you can do what I did in our 1 versus 1. You know, use something to absorb penetration, force them down with Phoboses and Magnetars. But when you reach this count, it gets really unhealthy, right? Because of the way that their system functions, is the way that it scales. It reaches a point where those solutions don't really work anymore. Like, maybe if I had an equal number of Alcagelisks, I could approach them. The problem is that an equal number of Alcagelisks is substantially more expensive. And even then, I'm not sure if it would actually work. I'm not really sure about that. So, the Hippogriff, I mean, the Hippogriff has always felt really strong, right? Like, particularly, my experience in trying to deal with them is mostly as Protoss, where I was Terran and I was fighting Protoss with Hippogriffs. You know, go back to those older FFAs. Or in more recent times, I was Protoss in an FFA with Popo and either Kian or Veek. And Popo just slowly crawled across the map with... now, back then, I think ion cans could still hit error. And one ion shot was enough to destroy an engram. So, engrams were basically a complete waste of money, and there was nothing you could do to approach the Terran as Protoss. You basically had to rely on, like, some double didact thing, which, if they were alert on defenses. He was a lot more on the ball in that game than in this game, let's put it that way. Then, yeah, it just wasn't going to work. You see, the Benno's giving Popo a lot of time to try to prepare for this, but Popo needs to be so much more decisive about what units he's going to build. I mean, the penetrating shots in general are very strong, right? Like, I think that if I was to look at the overarching health of this project in general, one of the things that really stands out to me is the AoE is too readily available, too reliable, and too high damage. Like, Cyprians are a common one that we go to, is Cyprians are the de facto opener for Terran, and that's just because penetrating shot is just so powerful. Now, gradually, Cyprians have been toned down, and some solutions have been made to help deal with Cyprians, but the fact is that Cyprians still crowd out the most majority of responses you can get. You can't do things against Cyprians you can so easily do against Fulcrum openers, just because of the way Cyprians work, and the fact you can put them in I mean, you can put anything in anchors, but Cyprians become exponentially more powerful when you remove their main weakness, which is their squishiness, right? You have to be really careful about stuff like penetrating shots in AoE because of the way they scale. Oh, meanwhile, we finally get to see the Aeon in action as the onslaught of blackjack-fueled violence continues, but then the Hippogriffs arrive. Beaver made an effort. He's waited the whole game to be able to do this, but it wasn't enough. slowly but surely, Benno is creeping across the map, completely ignored Popo's main. Popo doesn't really have a lot of gas and is not really sure what to do at this moment. Beaver greatly underestimates the sheer insanity he's about to deal with. He's spent so long here trying to bake stuff. He's got a lot of money. He needs to really start expanding around, taking these bases. And stacking Zerg. Now, there is one possible solution to the Hippogriff problem that does exist within the balance of this game. And that is the Sovrolith. Remember, the Sovrolith just indefinitely stacks range with how many there are. So the theory is that if you had like 500 Sovroliths, you could kill the Hippogriffs well outside of their range. There's a few problems with that, though. First of all, you have to get 500 Sovroliths. Now, there are so many workers and blackjacks inside of Benno's base that this, in theory, this really is like trying to kill a blue whale or a sperm whale with nothing but a toothpick. He has so much money. Oh, he's pulling everything back. This is what I mean. This is how you can defeat Benno. Is you gotta rely on his overreactions here. It's one Hippogriff and a handful of Aeons. He pulls everything back. Now, this replay has quite a sum of time left, so I'll spare us both the agony of what ensues here. And speed this up at some portions of this, but I think it's still worth maybe discussing about to some extent here of my experiences. Obviously, I've made just dozens of total conversions, and some of them are all air units, like ITAS, you know, S5C, Ground Zero. There was UF, of course. And AoE was something that was so very... had to be so very cautious about. We didn't have penetrating shot, of course. That doesn't exist normally in Starcraft. That's a CMBW code change, right? We didn't have code changes back then. Just the grafting shit. Oh, the Anti-Chthon appeared. Now, of course, when you have a large number of units, they're going to do a large amount of damage. That's sort of just to be expected, but AoE just kind of like... it non-linearly influences that power budget, right? And then you have the arrow stacking behavior on top of it. Basically, the responsibility of trying to deal with this rests squarely on the shoulders of those fighting it, where they have to have like a perfect approach. Now, Benno hasn't been really amazingly careful about this. As time has gone on, he has taken damage on some of his Hippogriffs. Many of them are now half health or even lower in some cases. A world does exist in which Popo gets a stack of his own Hippogriffs, is able to distract them, and gets a good clean shot through the whole group, and ends up dealing a lot of damage. Or getting a large number of his own Sundogs, and takes advantage of the fact that Benno doesn't have any detection. But Popo has to work quite hard to get into the position to deal with that, just because of the sheer amount of damage potential. It's not just like, say, for example, the ungodly mass of blackjacks heading towards him. There's a lot of units. They can eventually brute force him down, but they do have to work a little bit to brute force him down, that's for sure. And since Benno is probably not going to be microing these very much at all, the losses are going to be absolutely insane. That's kind of more or less of really what you expect, right? The problem with AoE, of course, is that since it threatens a larger area than just an individual unit, there's already a higher requirement for actually dealing with it. It means that the potential throughput of a unit that has AoE is a lot higher than a unit that doesn't. Even if the AoE damage overall is lower, you're just scoring additional power budget for every unit that you hit with it. The Hippogriffs are a unit that has basically no real true weakness other than their health, right? But the health doesn't mean anything because you're generally going to take damage approaching them. So most units with more health than them, which the Alcagelisk admittedly does not have that much, is going to pay a chunk of its power budget just to even get close enough to start exchanging numbers to begin with. So when you have units like the Hippogriff and the Cyprian, they are just way stronger than what their numbers give them credit for. Honestly, I don't think Hippogriffs should have any more than like 2 armor penetration tops. But I also kind of feel like maybe they shouldn't have armor penetration at all. Or at least they shouldn't do a line trace attack. There was a unit in ITAS, it was one of the Kaloth Industries units. I think it was the Kaloth Battleship, actually. That race was very early into development. You had the Kaloth Battleship, and they always historically had AoE and huge fucking range. Now, they also had super long cooldown. So they were like the backbone of your fleet, in which they had crazy range, high damage, and AoE. But their attack cooldown was like 4, 5, 6 seconds. So even when you got a huge number of them, approaching them still wasn't that bad. Also, it was just like AoE on the spot. It wasn't a line trace, so approaching them was generally easier anyways. That race did not see heavy development, but it was always one of those things that you enter. It's like, I'm going to try to make this work. And of course, I didn't have a player base, right? Like most of my testing and balancing is done through throughputting literally thousands of hours of AI games in any given mod. Just endless AI games. In some ways, that makes things balanced in the sense you understand how things are going to work in certain circumstances. But you don't enter cases like this too often, right? Because the AI can't coordinate anything. Meanwhile, Benno has to lift all of his fulcrums because the blackjacks are trapped inside of his base. Now, Benno's insistence on spamming blackjacks is giving Popo a lot of breathing room here because, well, Benno could just as easily make Wraiths or some other unit that's less gas. I mean, when you have 37,000 gas, do you give a shit if it's gas intensive or not? You don't. So You don't. And I believe that at this point, Popo and Beaver are actually allied. And their hope was to get Beaver to the stage so he could get Sovereigns. The problem, of course, is that you're going to need a lot of corpses, and I don't think they ever had a plan on how to get the corpses for the Sovereigns. But Benno just was not at all prepared to play Hunt the Command Center, Hunt the Hatchrods. Finally, he came down to Popo's main. Popo put a bunch of Silver Tongues into anchors, thinking that might give them a little bit of range. I mean, it would have, but they don't deal AoE as far as I can tell, so it was going to make no difference at all. You might kill one Hippogriff tops. So they're stamped out. I would love to give you a real end game here, but you already know that Benno basically wins this, right? Like this, there isn't many ways he can lose at this point. The real question is how autistic can these two be to force him to win through sheer attrition? Will eventually he have to go to sleep and then they will win? Well, sometimes it felt like Benno might have been falling asleep. But he endures. He endures the lash of the spanking as individual structures. Popo's been reduced to just a handful of things. He's got a Pazuzu and some other shit here. Meanwhile, Beaver does have some money, but he's been found. No, he hasn't. Just kidding, LMAO. So how do you balance a unit that has long range and high AoE? Well, just nerfing the damage numbers can help. I think giving them a longer cooldown can help as well. I don't know if it makes a difference when you have 50 of them. You have to understand that, of course, when they have a high cooldown, they still overlap a lot, right? So it makes a lot less of a difference at this point. You have to make a concession at some points, and particularly with penetrating attacks, it's totally uncharted territory, right? Like if the Hippogriffs just did spot AoE on impact, like the Penumbra, for example, they would be a lot less powerful, right? Like you could overwhelm them a lot more easily. And kind of like the Sundogs, they do just AoE in a spot, right? So they'll kill stacked air units, but you can kind of separate. You can't really separate. Kill us like a man with no hippos. Benno takes up this challenge as best as he can, but you know what that means. That means this is going to become, like, unbelievably autistic. There's a lot of vision over here from Popo, but nothing's actually going on. Did we desync? I think this desynced at this point. Because I was sure Popo... This is desynced. Popo's camera is looking around, but nothing's happening. Popo is actually spending money. Okay, he's building an ant seal. I thought for a while Popo had a base, but I know that Beaver was like running around the map trying to tech up, but that doesn't seem to happen at this point. And they keep looking basically nowhere over here. I know Beaver had a base over here for a long time. So the replay did eventually desync. Anyways, this replay is there's a reason why I'm casting this. It's not just because the beginning half of this was silly, but once it got to the point there's so many hippogriffs, it just felt like, well, why even bother, right? But you know, that's how you learn. Like, how many games have we gotten to where there has been like 50 hippogriffs? Not many. But hippogriffs did always feel like they were really overbearing again in the Protoss matchup. We don't really see too many games of high-end Zerg versus high-end Terran where it isn't already really one-sided. In this game, there was definitely some things I could have done better. I could have tried to multitask better, but that's probably asking too much. Take the right side of the map. I mean, Benno is always going to be in a stronger position because I had to deal with constant attack. Whereas he basically dealt with nothing except for keying at the one point and then a little bit of tickling from Beaver. And I was able to basically tack up and mass shit without really any contest whatsoever. And, you know, in a circumstance where we were even footing economically, perhaps I could have tried to... I don't know, what would you do against that, right? I mean, Vithrilisks, if they can get close enough, can debuff them, and that would help a lot. But you gotta be able to get close enough, and the approach is really the hardest part. Now, like I said, you don't necessarily have to reduce their damage or their range. I think increasing the cooldown and then increasing the turn rate can help a lot. A lot of the problem with this and the problem with trying to approach them is the fact that they can turn on a dime and insta-give anything that enters range. Like Popo's Magnetar, the second it came in range, it was instantly dead. Like the second it entered his vision. Now, hippos don't have as much sight range as they do have normal range, so that also is already a weakness. But if they had much slower turning speed on top of it, then you would have to have a little bit more awareness for them. And trying to surround them with things like Zarkavir might help a little bit. Now, Popo has told me several times that the Occasionalist is due for some kind of rework, so perhaps whatever changes it gets will make it more viable. Also, it's a single target damage unit, so even if the Occasionalists were able to close distance with him and start exchanging, I don't think they would have accomplished that much anyways. It's pretty obvious this is desynced at this moment, so we're going to actually continue our conversation in the next set of games because Popo has told me he may have some things that are relevant to this discussion within those. Oh, so I have to go AFK. It's worth noting, another thing you can do to balance these units with long range and high AoE is projectile speeds. Unitas, there was the several undead units with fairly long range and very high AoE. The Soro Song really comes to mind, but anything with plasma torpedoes. And they all generally moved quite slowly, so that definitely gave you a lot of room for a counterplay. And it also made them more of a zoning tool than just straight up, look at me, I built nothing but this one unit. And therefore it will always win. Again, it brings me back to the whole mod nights with SEN, where they thought they could just do nothing but mass blood moons, and they forgot that they had a minimum range. And then they thought that the Xenon project was underpowered because of that, but, you know, just the way that things that are balanced with this were done a really specific way. And most certainly one of the biggest enemies of balancing these things is the air splash, right? Like, well, with Hippogriffs in particular, you can't really approach them with ground units anyways. I mean, this is a map where you could, because it's much more open. But most of the maps, the 15 range makes it absolutely prohibitive, or at least the Hippogriffs can usually position themselves in such a way that the line trace is going to deal enormous damage to any grounded army approaching them. But with other units, conventionally, the AoE is less effective against ground units, except in those specific cases because they don't bunch together as much. Air stacking is one of the biggest enemies of trying to balance stuff like AoE damage, because they're always going to stack, and it requires an exorbitant amount of APM to not stack them. And also it means that air units can put their damage down into one place so much more. That's why another reason why the Hippogriffs are so absurdly strong is because you have 40 of them stacked into one place. It's no longer like 50 total damage. It's like thousands of total damage in one spot. And to approach them with other air units, you're going to converge onto that one spot, which makes it even stronger than it already is. So it's like everything is working against people trying to approach that. We're at least with things like Midas, they have a finite number of targets because of their bounce, right? So even in cases where you enter the convergence into a stack of damage, it's not as strong. Again, in the Zerg game that we saw of the Calculusks versus the Toskrolls, that's probably why the Calculusks won, is because of penetrating behavior versus finite targets. You would almost certainly give the battle to the Toskrolls normally because of the higher stats, higher damage, higher attack. But that's just the power of AoE versus finite targets, right? I think with the Hippogriff, you could attack this problem in a number of ways if you really do perceive this to be a problem, and I most certainly do. I perceive Cyprians to still be a very dominant problem for the exact same reasons, and Sentinels to a lesser extent, is the way that the penetrating shot works. You could change the way penetrating shots work, in which each penetration reduces the armor of which it can penetrate as well. But that wasn't even really the issue for me in this game. I mean, sure, it resulted in all my Gorg Cores and Sarcavagors getting annihilated way faster than I thought they would. I really severely underestimated just how much damage was going to be put out to them. It wouldn't have helped for the Alcajulas because it didn't seem like they were actually getting penetrated. It wouldn't have helped Popo either. It was more like, you can stick all these fat-ass units into one spot, and you just have that much concentrated units in one spot. Even if they were all single target units with no AoE at all, I don't think it would have made a damn of a difference. Just because it's nearly instant hits and huge range, right? Like the AoE part almost didn't even matter in this game whatsoever. Period. It was just, they just snap around and instantly hit you with a massive lump sum of damage. And you can't really approach them without taking crazy amounts of damage. But again, Benno is being so lax about his detection. I think, just because they were bunching up, that a stack of Sundogs to counter him could have been very effective. But I feel like maybe Popo wasn't sure what to do at that point. He was kind of like trying to make Silver Tongues work, and they don't. They definitely don't work. I think that Popo underestimated the strength of his own units, really. Like his own unit design, as he didn't really realize just how powerful Hippos really were at that point. Or he didn't quite realize just how many there were, because if there was only a few of them, then the Silver Tongues would have worked really well. They definitely did not work well in this case at all.